Hi, it's Dwyer. Today is December the 19th, 2017. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. DwyerSportsBetting.com, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. I'm going to do something here that I don't normally do. Here online, I'll pick fights. Sometimes I'll get the fight wrong. I know many people are saying most of the time you'll get the fight wrong. Okay, well, whatever your point of view is, right? But, I'll see the things in the fighter who I picked against that made me pick against the fighter. In other words, I'll look at a fight, let's say an Anthony Joshua fight, and I'll see the clunkiness. Right? The fact that he's a little bit upright. The stamina issues. That gave me pause before picking his opponent, Vladimir Klitschko, in their big fight, which Anthony Joshua won. Now, I'm someone who really does believe that, nobody owes me anything, and I don't owe anyone anything, right? Outside of perhaps mom and dad, when they were alive. I'm certainly not somebody here online who, even when he gets it wrong, is going to offer an apology, right? I believe that, gamblers are adults. I'm giving you my point of view. What you do with it is up to you. But let's not cry at the end of a bout where, before the bout, we took a chance in taking a stance. But here, this is that rare fight. Where I'm actually going to apologize here online to middleweight champion Billy Joe Saunders. Right? I was waiting for this fight, folks, for months. I was on the other side of the play. I thought Lemieux was going to take the title. I privately expected Lemieux to take the title by KO. Once I heard that the fight was in Canada, I thought it was a foregone conclusion. Now, let me say this. I followed Billy Joe Saunders' career. Right now, my pre-fight videos for his fights against Chris Eubank, where I took Saunders, right, and that fight wasn't clear beforehand, and his fight against Andy Lee, where I took Saunders, who has less experience than Andy Lee, right? I knew who Saunders was. But at the same time, I thought Billy Joe Saunders, at 28 years of age, had lost his edge. Right? He looked to me like a better fighter when he was hungry. Right? Then once he got the championship, once he had a stellar first 6 rounds against Chris Eubank, once he drops Andy Lee, I thought he had lost his edge. So the Akavov fight, I wasn't impressed. The Willie Monroe Jr. fight, I wasn't impressed. I just looked at Saunders at weigh-ins, right, and in the ring. And he just didn't look to me to be a fighter in top physical condition, right, in bouts. He looked like he was being out-hustled later in bouts. And, of course, this was a guy who only fought once in 2016. Wasn't a world traveler. In fact, had not fought outside of the UK for some long number of fights. So this had all the makings of David Lemieux coming in and having 12 rounds to land one good shot on a complacent, too well-fed champion who had lost his edge several fights ago. That's not what happened, right? In my pre-fight video, which is here online, right, I basically said that I thought, right, and I said this using flowery language, I said I basically thought that Billy Joe Saunders at this point in his career was really more of a name than a fighter. Right? That his complacency was going to catch up with him. That this is a sport filled with hungry fighters, guys hungrier than him, and that his cavalier attitude toward being a world champion, and the fact that he's fighting not the Canelos and the Golovkins and the Danny Jacobses of the world, but he's fighting the Akavovs and the Willie Monroe Jr.'s of the world, right, led me to believe that he wasn't the man for this job. Now, let me just say, and I'm going to let this phone call just ring in the background. I'll let this phone call ring on my computer, right? Let me just say this. I was very wrong. For that, I apologize to Billy Joe Saunders. I underestimated the heart of this champion. Right? Saunders in Canada, before a crowd that very much wanted to see their hometown fighter or home country fighter take the middleweight championship. Right? Saunders lays out a masterpiece. Folks, these are the fights that have me here online. There's nothing better than a highly skilled fighter who's been dissed by odds makers, right? The challenger here went off at practically even money with the champion. Getting in shape, dedicating himself to the sport, coming in with all the haters, people like me here online, questioning him, and then showing us the skills that has put the title belt around his waist, taking the crowd out of the fight, baffling and confusing his opponent, making his opponent look like an amateur, doing so in a way where several rounds of this fight, Saunders puts on the kind of performance where you think to yourself, that's one of the best rounds I've seen a fighter have this last year. Let me just say this. I'm going to name some rounds here. If you get a copy of this fight, you need to look at these rounds. Now keep in mind, when they enter the ring, there is uncertainty. You definitely get the feeling the crowd is ready for the title to change. Lemieux looks confident at the opening bell of the first round that he's going to get a knockout. He's on his front foot. When we get to the second round, I'm telling you, the second round is a candidate, simply put, for one of the best rounds a fighter has had this last year. Well, that round doesn't stand alone, folks. The seventh round, in my opinion, is a candidate for one of the best rounds a fighter has had this last year. Those two rounds aren't the only two. In the eighth round, it's clear. This is Billy Joe Saunders on his A game. And when he's on his A game, few can touch him. Right? Let me say, at middleweight, I personally would not hesitate to take this Billy Joe Saunders over Saul Alvarez. Right? Before this fight, I didn't think Saunders would have a shot against Danny Jacobs. Folks, I'm not so sure now. I'll say this. I do think Golovkin beats Billy Joe Saunders. One man's opinion. Right? I could be wrong, as I was on this fight. But let me say this. Golovkin against Billy Joe Saunders is a much more interesting fight. Much more interesting fight than the rematch of Golovkin against Saul Alvarez. Right? In fact, this is the kind of fight where a boxing purist is going to say to themselves, you know, Golovkin's legacy requires that he fight Billy Joe Saunders. Understand, Saunders, as I make this tape, remains unbeaten. Right? I'm just telling you, the Saunders against Chris Eubank, the first 6 rounds, as good as Saunders looked there, and I would say that's the best I've seen Saunders look in his career. This Billy Joe Saunders, the guy who showed up on the road in Canada, looked far better than the Saunders who dissected Chris Eubank. Right? Let's talk about it, because it's really shocking. Saunders is southpaw. Right? Now he's circling to his right, and he's doing it seamlessly. Right? He's moving to his right away from orthodox fighter David Lemieux's right hand. Right? Saunders has his right foot outside of Lemieux's feet. Right? He's able to do it a little bit too consistently. You wonder what Lemieux is doing here. Right? Let me say this. Saunders is playing a spatial game. He's on his back foot. He's going to his right, but you don't know the angle he's going to take. And he's moving on his back foot consistently, but he's never caught up on the ropes. Now, as he's moving, right, as he's moving, and the heavyweight division needs to figure this out, because guys in the heavyweight division just don't have this skill today. As Saunders is on his back foot, moving away from Lemieux's right hand, he's throwing down a Larry Holmes level jab. Right? The jab is really the story of this fight. There's a reason why Lemieux just can't cover up and run inside. It's because Lemieux is getting systematically taken apart with a jab that is accurate as Saunders is on the move. Right? Let me say, too, that by the second round of this fight, Saunders has figured out the depth perception. Now, this is against a guy who has one of the biggest punches, pound for pound, in boxing. Billy Joe Saunders starts to drop his hands. He starts to drop his hands early. Keep in mind, Lemieux's best chance of winning this fight is by KO. And what you're going to notice is Saunders, with his hands dropped, knows that Lemieux's punches, if he leans back, are going to stop right about here. So you have a champion who, while moving, has the confidence to drop his hands. This is while he's throwing jabs. He has the confidence to drop his hands, and as Lemieux comes forward, Saunders, with a lean while moving, knows Lemieux can't touch him. Right? This is championship level stuff from a champion. Let me say, too, that when Lemieux gets a little discouraged, and folks, it's discouraging early. As I said, the second round is a simply spectacular round from a boxing skill standpoint. Because as Lemieux gets a little discouraged, Saunders stops moving, starts hinting at throwing bolo punches. Right? As you're watching the fight, you understand that Saunders is literally channeling the Ray Leonard who beats Roberto Duran in the rematch. Right? Saunders is convinced that he's fighting a guy who can't move, that he's fighting a mummy. It's even better than that. The crowd is into it, not Saunders. Right? The crowd's not into great boxing. The crowd's into their fighter. So the crowd is animated. And you have One of those moments that's endemic in boxing, where a champ is there understanding that he's taking on the crowd and his opponent. And what does Saunders do? Right? Saunders is threatening to throw bolo punches. Saunders is holding up a middle finger to everyone in the room who's not part of his corner. He's basically mocking everyone, saying, gee, you thought this guy here was going to be able to take my title. Now let me say, I'm someone who bet against Saunders in this fight. So as I'm watching the second round, folks, it's like watching a horror movie for me. Right? Here I am expecting Saunders to come out overconfident, to come out of shape, to come out a little bit, uninspired like he did against Willie Monroe Jr. And suddenly here I have Saunders looking in great shape. Faster hands than Lemieux. Much lighter on his feet than Lemieux. Has the timing down. Has Lemieux timed to the point where when Lemieux starts throwing left hands, right? Because keep in mind, Saunders is moving to his right. So you would think a Lemieux left hook would cause him trouble. Saunders, incredibly, is ducking under the left hook while he's moving to his right. Right? This is the kind of stuff that doesn't make sense. Unless you're talking about a guy who's championship level, who's on his A game, who has decided that this fight is going to be a signature fight. Folks, it all works for Billy Joe Saunders. As I'm looking at the fight, I started to think to myself, wow, is Saunders going to run out of gas in the second half of the fight? Like he did against Chris Eubank. You get to the second half of the fight, and as I said, the seventh round, well, first let me say this. At the end of the second round, you're looking at that round and you're saying, my God, Saunders looks good. Then Saunders tops himself with about, let's say, 15 seconds left in the round. He somehow gets Lemieux over by the ropes, and Lemieux looks defenseless. Saunders, the guy who had been moving, is now flat-footed. Folks, the bell saves Lemieux in that second round. Right? Billy Joe Saunders is in front of him. He's flashing hand speed. You understand Lemieux is completely outgunned. He's leaning back against the ropes. Then the bell sounds. Right? By the end of the second round, you understood. Saunders means business tonight. This might be one of those nights where nothing Lemieux does is going to matter. So we get to the seventh round. The punch of the seventh round is a Billy Joe Saunders right hand. Right? Just understand, Billy Joe Saunders is a southpaw. That's his off hand. He literally stuns Lemieux to the point where it's Lemieux, the puncher, who's covering up from Billy Joe Saunders. Now, as you look at Saunders in that seventh round, what I want you to do is to just look at Saunders' hands. Right? I'm not sure if I've ever seen a guy fight David Lemieux with his hands, both hands, down around his waist. In a round where the guy with his hands down around his waist is dominating. Right? Just understand, Saunders is throwing power shots with his offhand. Lemieux, as you're looking at Lemieux and you see Lemieux trying to get inside, Lemieux is just getting reminded from time to time that Saunders has power. Let me say this too. We get to the eighth round, right? And it's clear by the start of the eighth round that Lemieux needs a knockout to win the fight. I want you to key on the last 45 seconds of the 8th round. That's a big moment for fighters, right? I have no idea what the guys are saying to each other, but I'm just telling you that in the last 45 seconds of the 8th round, Saunders is toying with David Lemieux to the point where you understand that Lemieux had to realize that he's in way over his head, right? So, let me say, I was one of the doubters on Billy Joe. Billy Joe's still in his 20s. I thought that his time had passed. I thought that he had gotten out of shape, was no longer motivated. You know, it was like Sylvester Stallone in Rocky III. After too much success had gone to his head. No, this Saunders is a hungry fighter, folks. I'd like to see Saunders at 168 pounds against unbeaten champion, Gilberto Ramirez. I think that's a fascinating fight. Right, Saunders, I'll even say this, in the 12th round, Saunders decides he's just going to move away from Lemieux. The crowd's booing him, right? The crowd boos at times in this fight. The crowd's booing him. So Saunders gets up on his toes and just starts bouncing around the ring. When you realize how much spring Saunders still has in his legs in the last round, you understand this fight's a wrap. It's a done deal. There is no way Lemieux is going to be able to close the distance. Right? So let me say, this is a 5-star performance out of 5 by Billy Joe Saunders. I consider the fight to be a masterpiece. My favorite round of the fight is the 2nd round, early, when the fight's still uncertain. And you're wondering how a fighter is going to distinguish themselves. Right? It's in that moment that you become acutely aware that the two guys in the ring have a talent gap. That Saunders just knows the sport too well to be bothered by David Lemieux. Right? Lemieux is a slugger who's trying to come in, right? Mid-range hooker, wants to get mid to short-range hooker, wants to pin you up on the ropes, wants to let both hands go. Saunders basically lets all of us know, this guy's not going to pin me up on the ropes without my permission. This guy's going to have to get by a stiff jab. Right? If this guy starts throwing left hands, I'm going to duck under the left hands, which is a bit shocking because Saunders is the taller fighter. He does it repeatedly. Right? And that Saunders' defense is such, like Ali's defense, like Vitaly Klitschko's defense, is such that he doesn't have to put up a hand to block your punches. He can move body parts and just have your punch end here. Masterful performance. I'm very impressed. I can't wait to see how this all plays out at middleweight. Right? Bravo. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this video. Thanks for stopping by.